Yo, you're watching the Awesemo Fantasy Football Channel. I'm Dave Loughran. With me, as always, Matt Gajewski. And today we're closing out the series with tight end tiers. We already did running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks. Check all of that out right here on the channel if you haven't done so yet. And then come back to it. Or watch this one first and then come back. Doesn't matter. The order is unimportant. What is important, though, is that we break all of these down and really basically touch on some serious strategy outside of just tiers as well. How are you drafting tight ends? How serious are the tiers when it breaks from Kelce to Waller to Kittle, so on and so forth, into the later rounds of the draft, whether it's standard league, just redraft, PPR, super flex, whatever it is, and more importantly, best ball. So Matt, a lot to dive into today. It's not a position that everyone gets super excited about, but it's a super important position when it comes to how you attack it.
Yeah, it's probably the most nuanced position we have. If you just look at your standard 12-team leagues, your team with Travis Kelce has a significant advantage over that number 12 team who's maybe streaming week to week and getting 5 or 6 points. So where you draft some of the more valuable tight ends is crucial to these overall fantasy drafts.
No doubt. And I think it's important to point out as well that, people look at tight ends and they say, I don't like drafting early tight ends. They're just not as good. But you have to consider a couple of things here. Travis Kelce was the 7th best PPR producer in the league last year. And I'm talking running back, wide receiver, and tight end, not just pass catchers. Darren Waller PPR formats was 10th. So both of these guys were top 10 in scoring, not at their positions, of course, not even as pass catchers, but among all skill players. So I think, Matt, it's important to consider not just that these guys are legitimate elite wide receivers playing a tight end position, but also how scarce the position is at tight end compared to other spots. Whereas if you're landing one of the 2, maybe 3 elite tight ends in this league, you're, as you kind of put it right there, you're head and shoulders ahead of everybody else as long as the rest of your draft looks solid.
For sure. You basically have a wide receiver 1 in your tight end position. And we know from experience, it's much easier to fill the wide receiver slots than it is the tight end slot. So there is a lot of merit to drafting them early.
Yeah, and I think you could also make an argument. I don't have any, quantifiable data on this, but it just kind of makes sense given how one position just doesn't produce as well on the whole, and it's also there's less of them. But it's got to be much easier to hit on late round wide receivers that end up, making starts for you than it would be to hit on late round tight ends.
For sure. Let's even just look back to last year. Some of the popular late round tight ends. Adam Troutman, Chris Herndon's been a popular late round tight end.
Cole Kmet last year with 2.
Cole Kmet. I mean, we're talking my Chicago Bears and my Notre Dame Fighting Irish in that one. That one really hurt. But yeah, like you said, a lot of these late round tight ends aren't panning out, whereas the late round wide receivers, there's more of them on the field. It's a little easier for a late round wide receiver to produce.
All right. Well, now that we have that in mind, one more question, then we jump into our tiers. Yesterday I did an underdog draft. By the way, follow Matt and myself. Follow Matt at _Gajewski on Twitter, myself at Loughy_D. Throw them up there if they're not there already. I'm going to be tweeting out draft links, private draft links to jump into. First come, first serve. But yesterday was a lot of fun. We filled up real quick. It's only a $5 one, but we're going to do a $50 one. Matt and I are going to jump in one of those pretty soon, 25, 10. We'll go up and down no matter what it is, whatever your stakes are. But if you haven't signed up yet, go to underdog.fantasy.com. Use the promo code Awesemo, AWESEMO, and get $25 upon signing up. So you're ready for when we do these drafts if you want to join us. Again, at Loughy_D, at Matt_Gajewski. We'll be throwing links out, doing some drafts leading up to the season. Underdog Fantasy is awesome. You'll love it. And outside of those huge tournaments, the $1 million, the first, the puppy 3, and then the other high stakes one, they got some cool private leagues that we'll be getting in on as well. But Matt, yesterday I was doing an underdog draft and Kelce fell to 9 to me. And to me, it was just an incredibly easy decision, but people continue to draft, Aaron Jones ahead of him and a number of other players, which many of them, I think you can make an argument for. Where do you have Kelce ranked?
Yeah. So I have Kelce ranked right at number 7 right now. So he's right in the same tier that has Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, and his teammate Tyreek Hill. If you're just looking across positions, within the tight end position, I do have him on an island by himself. He is the only surefire first round tight end. He has everything you want: elite offense, elite target share. He has already posted elite production. I mean, you go back through this guy's career, he's never had less than 850 receiving yards in a season where he played a majority of the year. Now he redshirted his first year in the league, but after that, it's been wheels up for Travis Kelce, and it's only gotten better. They lose Sammy Watkins, so I think there's even the argument that there might be less target competition this year in Kansas City. You just can't really poke any holes in his game. The only way I don't think he's a tight end one is if he's hurt.
I know people talk about his age and everything as well, but he's coming off one of the most dominant seasons ever. As not only as a tight end, of course, as a tight end, it was insane, but just in general, last season for Kelce was remarkable. 1,416 yards. He only played 15 games. He had 11 receiving touchdowns. He's now gone double-digit touchdowns in 2 of 3 years, 100-plus receptions in 2 of 3 years, and he had 97 in the year where he didn't get there. So he is a legitimate stud on all fronts. PPR formats in terms of receptions, yards, touchdowns, red zone targets. You're going to get everything from him. But I think you can make the same argument for Darren Waller. Now, I'm not saying Darren Waller is on the same level as Kelce, but here's what I am saying, Matt. And I made a video here on the channel, must draft player in every round. Darren Waller was my must draft player in round 2. And you can get him later than that in some home leagues because he was, again, top 10 player in PPR formats last year. Oakland's offense actually isn't that bad. They actually can support some pretty good offensive players, namely Darren Waller. But he went from being scarcely targeted in the red zone 2 years ago to last year being second in red zone targets in the league behind only Davante Adams. And that's a huge stat to have for tight end position where it's so touchdown dependent on many situations, especially late in the draft. But with Waller, you're getting the targets, again, the yards, the receptions, and now you're getting the touchdowns, his first double-digit touchdown season. I really like him. What about you when it comes to Waller? Is he in the second tier all on his own?
I think he's in the second tier with Kittle. A lot of that I think comes down to offensive efficiency. Las Vegas doesn't have any good players on their team on offense, and that kind of works in Waller's favor just because he's going to be targeted so much. They lost Aguilar, who was their best receiver. I know Waller was their best pass catcher, but that just takes one more player away from this potential target share. I don't know. Outside of injury, I think Waller has another monster season from just target numbers. And last year, I mean, he already had a 27.7% target share. That's absurd even among wide receivers. Yeah. And we don't necessarily care that the offense is that bad if he's going to see that volume.
No, not at all. And ultimately, when it comes to Darren Waller, could Bryan Edwards be good? Sure, he's showing out in camp. Could Henry Ruggs, the number 1 receiver off the board in the 2020 draft, end up being good? Sure. But if they aren't, I don't think it kills Waller because the volume is going to be insane. But if they do end up being good and you have a field stretcher and a couple guys that can take pressure off of him, I don't know if it hurts him either way.
I agree with you. The target volume is everything. Waller's going to have it. He's certainly not going to have as many yards or score as many touchdowns as a guy like Kelce, but that's okay. That's why he's in a slight tier below. You're not spending the first round capital on Waller. You can get him in the second round, sometimes on that 2-3 turn, and I'm comfortable with him there.
I can't help but wonder whether or not Kittle's going too late. It feels like people are down on George Kittle right now because of the injuries and because Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. But I think you and I have actually talked about this quite a bit. George Kittle is still remarkable. And even with the low touchdown totals, he's still one of the highest targeted tight ends in the red zone. He had several games where he had touchdowns called back on offensive penalties. I'm sure you remember some of those. Super tilting for DFS from a DFS standpoint. But it's still tough to know whether or not Jimmy Garoppolo starts because we know that they have a real connection, or if it's Trey Lance and what the run game looks like. Is there just more uncertainty with Kittle than there is with Darren Waller going into this year?
There is. I think it mainly comes from the quarterback position, and I think Lance starts pretty early in the year, if not week 1. We haven't gotten any honesty out of Kyle Shanahan, so that remains to be seen. But a lot of people point to Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, and it's a little questionable to me because when they were healthy last year, Kittle was far and away the number 1 pass catcher in this offense, and it wasn't close. 24% target share, 26% air yard share. I know Ayuk emerged at the end of the year, but the question for that offense with me is not if Kittle's the number 1 or Ayuk's the number 1. I'm questioning Ayuk's production without Kittle and Deebo Samuel on the field. We already saw Kittle do it with those guys. So how does a guy like Ayuk move forward? I think this is still Kittle's job as the number 1 pass catcher in San Francisco.
Absolutely. I'm with you. I really am. I have a little bit of a little questioning whether or not it's going to look the same as it did before. But George Kittle's so good. He's also a good blocker. He's going to be on the field for almost every damn snap. So I can take solace in knowing that. The next tier is where it gets weird to me because, and Matt, you could talk to me about what order you have them in. Guys like Kyle Pitts, Mark Andrews, who was carted off the field today. We're recording this on the 19th of August. I don't know if it was cramps. I know he got an IV and all of it. We'll see what it is there. But assuming he's okay, Matt, do you have Pitts, Andrews, and Hockenson in a tier of their own, or is that tier bigger or smaller?
That's the tier, exactly. It's funny. You and I have been pretty much eye to eye on the rankings this year. I have Pitts at the head of the tier. I think he's most likely to jump into that tier one. Just the best tight end prospect we've ever seen coming out of Florida. Calvin Johnson level athleticism and a lot of vacated targets in Atlanta by Julio Jones. An offense that should be running a ton of 12 personnel with their new head coach. Pitts is the number one tight end in this tier. Still, like Andrews, will treat this as if he's fully healthy. He is one of the primary pass catchers in Baltimore. I am concerned that they added more weapons. Baltimore has been a disaster this preseason with Marquise Brown and Rashad Bateman all undergoing injuries. But I think Andrew's still locked in as that big slot receiving tight end in Baltimore, very productive throughout his career. And Hockenson is in this tier based on target volume alone. Think of him like a poor man's Darren Waller. Hasn't proven it yet, but still should see a target volume similar to what Waller will see.
I think that's a good way to put it. Just expect volume. I wouldn't even be surprised if Hockenson had a low 1,000-yard season, like 1,050. You know what I mean? Something like that.
Which is great for a tight end. Like if you get that out of tight end, you're happy. That's the tight end one every single week.
Absolutely. Now, as far as touchdown equity goes on that offense, it's hard to say. But I'm with you. The volume should be there. And hopefully Jared Goff turns his way. I assume he will. I don't see any reason he wouldn't. The next tier, we get down to guys like Logan Thomas, Tyler Higbee, who I really like Tyler Higbee this year. I won't do it now, but I think I could make an argument for him being in a similar tier as the Hockensons and the Mark Andrews this season, but I won't go crazy yet. Okay. Just know that I like him. But Dallas Goedert was someone that was in this tier for a while, at the top of the tier, as a matter of fact, easily, right below Hockenson. But now with the emergence of Zach Ertz and the looks of him not being traded in Philadelphia, and right now you have to just assume that he's going to play in week one and not be out of Philly. What does that do for Goedert? And what does that do to the rest of this tier where you have guys like Logan Thomas, Higbee? And I don't know if you have players like Noah Fant in there as well.
Yeah, you basically named the tier for me. I still have Goedert in the tier, but he was tight end one among these players. Right. Now he's at the very end. So at the top of the tier, just like you, Tyler Higbee should benefit from Matthew Stafford coming in, should benefit from the departure of Gerald Everett. They don't really have any other players to compete with him outside of a day 3 rookie in Jacob Harris, who played wide receiver in college at UCF and really wasn't any good doing that anyway. He had less receiving yards than like undrafted free agents that are playing with the Texans and Marlon Williams. So I don't have a ton of interest in Jacob Harris. Love Logan Thomas. He only ascended as he continued to develop as a tight end. This is a guy that hasn't played tight end for very long with Washington. And they only took a day 3 pick on rookie from Boise State, John Bates, who hasn't played very well in the preseason. So it still should be Logan Thomas by himself. He's the second tight end in this tier. Third is Noah Fant. I still like him a ton. Quarterback is questionable between Locke and Bridgewater, and then he'll still be competing with Sutton and Judy and whoever emerges as that wide receiver 3, probably a KJ Hamler or a Tim Patrick. Not to mention Albert Okwuegbunam is coming back after an ACL tear, so maybe they run more 12 personnel. But those are the top 3 in the tier for me.
Is it possible that Logan Thomas is undervalued, given that last year you were dealing with Alex Smith and Taylor Heineke, and now you're dealing with Ryan Fitzpatrick and a lot of suspect or at least unproven wide receiver options outside of Terry McLaurin? I understand they have Curtis Samuel as well, but is it possible that Logan Thomas could actually be targeted pretty heavily this year?
Absolutely. I mean, you look to Miami, Mike Gesicki had over 700 receiving yards, and that was on a target share that was just north of 16%.
That's a good point.
Barely. And we made, I think, upward ceiling for Logan Thomas target share is around like 22%. If you see something like that, this could be another player that gets into a low 1,000-yard season with upside. Again, just learning the position. This is really his second year playing it after he emerged as the tight end last preseason.
Yeah, I mean, he was targeted 110 times last year to Gesicki's 85. And Gajewski did that with Ryan Fitzpatrick at the helm in many of those games. Obviously, Tua started some of them, but yeah, that's a really good point. The next one, let's break this down. You've got, so this is where it gets weird. Like, I think Irv Smith is an upside play, a real red zone threat, super athletic player that can, that can battle for balls and come down on contested catches. I love to see that. Robert Tonyan last year had an insane touchdown rate, which is, no matter how good Rodgers is, it just feels completely unsustainable. Noah Fant, Mike Gesicki, like, how do you break this tier down? Is it a big one, or are there just a couple guys in here that stand out to you?
I like Tonyan quite a bit at the end of this tier. So I think Fant is at the top if you're including him. But Tonyan, just his attachment to Aaron Rodgers is great. It looks like Green Bay will be a little deeper at receiver this year, so maybe the target share comes down a little bit. And Rodgers certainly isn't going to throw, it was 48 touchdowns, I believe. He's not going to throw that many touchdowns. That was a crazy outlier season compared to what he'd put up in recent years. But even if we have a 75% Rodgers compared to last year, still a ton of touchdowns, a lot of yardage to go around, and that's enough for me. Goedert is the really interesting one. And I think people were assuming Zach Ertz would get cut. I think now that we had injuries to Tyree Jackson and Jason Kroom, this tight end room in Philadelphia is so thin that they can't really afford to trade Ertz at this point. We know they like running 12 personnel, but Ertz being out there potentially even stealing some snaps just bumps Goedert all the way to the bottom of the tier.
We don't need to go super deep in terms of tiers, but I think it'd be helpful for both of us to give a couple of guys that we really like down here as less, expensive guys that you can get at a value. I'll throw you a couple first, Matt. I think Zach Ertz is one of those guys because you're getting him essentially free. If you're drafting him in best ball, I just grabbed him in a draft in the 18th round. He still went undrafted in one that I did a couple days ago. I think I snagged him at the end of the 17th in one. He doesn't need to be great, but Zach Ertz is 1 year removed from being a very good tight end. And I think it's so easy to forget about that. Like Antonio Brown, you forget that only a couple years ago, this guy was on a stretch of being the number one wide receiver for like 4 straight years and then the wide receiver 5. All of these guys, it's easy to overlook that, but Ertz has been a very good tight end, a top 3 tight end for several years now. If he could get back to that, mind you, he's 30. He's the same age as Travis Kelce, essentially. I don't think that's a terrible spot to get to as your last pick in the draft. And then Rob Gronkowski. Rob Gronkowski came to Tampa Bay. It was a COVID-shortened season. Sure, he has a rapport with Tom Brady, but it was a brand new offense. I can't help but look at this and say, all right, from week 6 through 17 last year, Rob Gronkowski was the tight end 5. And it just kind of goes overlooked. Those 2 guys going very late. If you aren't getting to the players in the tiers that we talked about, or maybe you're looking for a solid backup in a deep bench or a 2 tight end league, maybe, or a tight end heavy, whatever it is, those 2 guys I think are pretty viable. And Matt, I think there are a couple more too.
Yeah, I like those 2. I like Ertz quite a bit. I mean, when they were both healthy last year, and Goedert and Ertz were both injured, Ertz only played in 11 games. He actually had the higher target share than Goedert overall. It was nearly 19%. That's a really healthy target share for a player in Ertz who everybody's completely discounting. So completely agree with you there. And then if you miss on Gronk, you miss on Ertz, and you're in the final round of your draft, you're probably streaming the position anyway. So I would honestly start to look at some of these players that are in timeshares, but are in strong offenses and run a lot of 12 personnel. I think a couple that really fit the bill are Cleveland and Atlanta. You can grab a guy like Austin Hooper really late in your draft. He's the number 1 tight end in Cleveland, a team that runs a ton of 12 personnel and is expected to be an explosive offense. Their win total is north of 10. And then you have Hayden Hurst, kind of the forgotten tight end in Atlanta. They have new head coach Arthur Smith coming in from Tennessee, who ran 12 personnel at one of the highest rates in the NFL when he was OC with the Titans. They lose Julio Jones, and now your top 2 receivers are Russell Gage and Ridley. Outside of that, I think there's an honest argument that Hayden Hurst and Kyle Pitts on the field together give them their best combination of offensive skill position players.
Matt, great stuff as always, man. You can follow Matt again at Matt_Gajewski. Check out all of the preseason DFS stuff that he's doing as well, and everything over at Awesemo.com and the Awesemo odds channel right here on YouTube. Hit me up at Loughy_D. And hey, if you're watching this today on Thursday, August 19th, Matt, I can only suggest that they come back over on our main Awesemo DFS channel and check out the Showdown live before lock show for the Philadelphia Eagles, New England Patriots tonight and win some money with us.
For sure. Check them out every single night this weekend. We have 5 days of football in a row, live before lock, before each of those slates. Come hang out with us.
We'll talk to you guys soon. And remember, the promo code Awesemo over at Underdog Fantasy. Get you $25 when you sign up. Come draft with us. Have some fun. We'll catch you back here for the next one. Peace.